I should have corrected her the second she said it. Instead, I stood there like it was the most natural thing in the world. My name's Ethan. I was 23, 6 months into my first real job, and completely unprepared for the woman who signed my paychecks. Claire was 45. Calm. Sharp. The kind of boss who never raised her voice because she never had to. She noticed everything: late reports, nervous smiles, untouched coffee. Most people admired her from a distance. I tried to do the same. That Tuesday started like every other workday until a client unexpectedly walked into our office. We were reviewing renovation plans in the conference room when he laughed, pointed at us, and asked, "So, how long have you two been married?" Before I could even breathe, Claire smiled politely. "Oh," she said, closing the folder in front of her, "he's my husband." The room erupted with easy laughter. I stared at her. She didn't blink. The client accepted it without another question, and the meeting continued as if nothing unusual had happened. My notes became meaningless lines across the page. Every time our shoulders nearly touched, I shifted my chair back a fraction. When everyone finally left, the office became strangely quiet. The air conditioner hummed. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. She gathered the papers without looking at me. "You've been unusually quiet," she murmured. "I was waiting for you to explain." A faint smile tugged at one corner of her mouth. She stepped closer, close enough that I caught the subtle scent of her perfume. Her fingers brushed my sleeve, not enough to stop me, just enough to keep me there. Then she leaned toward my ear and whispered, "I had a reason for calling you my husband, and you're not going to like what comes next." Claire didn't move away after she whispered those words. She simply stepped back, straightened the stack of files in her hands, and walked toward her office. "I'm leaving in 10 minutes, she said without turning around. "Come with me." Every sensible thought told me to refuse. She was my boss. People already whispered enough whenever we stayed late to finish projects. If anyone had heard what she'd said in that meeting, or seen the way she'd looked at me afterward, it would have become tomorrow's office gossip before sunrise. Still, "I'll come." Her apartment was only a few blocks from the office. She explained almost nothing during the drive. "I need a favor," she said quietly. "A personal one." Inside, the place surprised me. It wasn't cold or elegant like the office. There were half-watered plants by the window, a bookshelf with folded family photographs tucked between novels, and a coffee mug sitting in the sink as though she'd forgotten it days ago. "I've been pretending everything's fine," she admitted, setting her keys on the counter. "It isn't." She hesitated before opening a drawer. Inside lay an unopened envelope. "My divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago." The words hung between us. "I haven't told anyone at work." I looked at her differently then, not as the woman who always had every answer, but as someone carrying something heavy without letting it show. She laughed once, quietly. "I suppose calling you my husband wasn't the smartest decision I've ever made. It definitely caught me off guard. It protected me." I wanted to ask from what. Instead, I noticed the tiny tremble in the hand holding the envelope. She noticed me noticing and slipped her hand behind her back. Neither of us spoke. The silence somehow said more. "I know I shouldn't ask this," she finally whispered. She walked closer until only a step separated us, her fingers resting lightly against my forearm. "Would you stay a little longer, just until this apartment doesn't feel so empty?" I should have left. Instead, I accepted the mug of tea she silently placed in front of me and sat on the edge of her sofa, listening to the rain gather against the windows. Claire disappeared into the kitchen for a moment. When she returned, she'd changed out of her work blazer into a simple gray sweater and dark jeans. Somehow, she looked less like the woman who managed an entire company and more like someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. "You don't have to stay," she said, though she didn't look at the front door. "I know." Neither of us moved. She smiled faintly. "You're terrible at leaving. So are you." For the first time that evening, she laughed, a quiet, imperfect laugh that disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Then the lights flickered. The room fell into darkness for 2 long seconds before the emergency lamp on a nearby shelf switched on, washing everything in a soft amber glow. "Power outage," she murmured. Without thinking, she reached for the edge of the table at the exact moment I did. Our hands met. Neither of us pulled away immediately. She looked down first. "I keep making this harder than it should be." My heartbeat drowned out the rain. I opened my mouth to tell her this couldn't happen, that tomorrow she'd still be my boss, and I'd still have to look her in the eye across a conference table. Before I could say a word, her phone rang. The screen lit up between us. "Martin, board chairman." She answered, her voice instantly professional. "Yes, he's still here." A long pause followed. Her expression changed. "I understand." She ended the call and closed her eyes for a moment. "What happened?" I asked. She looked at me with a mixture of hesitation and resolve. "The board heard I introduced you as my husband today." She stepped one pace closer. "And tomorrow morning, they want to meet both of us." The drive to the office the next morning was almost silent. Claire kept both hands on the steering wheel. I watched the city wake through the windshield, wondering how one harmless lie had turned into something neither of us could undo. "They think we're hiding a relationship," I finally said. "I know. You could tell them the truth." She let out a slow breath. "I could." But she didn't sound convinced. The boardroom felt colder than usual. 3 executives sat across the table, asking careful questions wrapped in polite smiles. "When did your relationship begin?" Claire answered before I could. "Our personal lives have never affected our work." It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. An hour later, we walked out together, exhausted. "They're giving us 48 hours, she said quietly. "Either we explain everything, or one of us resigns." The word settled between us like a locked door. Back at her office, neither of us reached for the paperwork waiting on her desk. "This is my fault," she whispered. "No. I started it." You were trying to protect yourself. She laughed softly, but there wasn't any humor in it. You always find a way to defend me. She stepped closer, her eyes searching mine as though she were trying to memorize something. I've spent months pretending you're just another employee. My breath caught. I stayed late because you were still here. Her voice trembled. I volunteered for projects because they put us in the same room. She looked down, shaking her head. I kept telling myself it would pass. I should have reminded her who she was. My boss. 15 years older than me. The woman who could lose everything because of one careless decision. Instead, I took a single step toward her. So it wasn't just me. She looked up. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The distance between us had almost disappeared. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something she could never take back. Then, barely above a whisper, she asked, "If we stop pretending, what happens to us?" Claire's question stayed between us. Neither of us answered. A knock at the office door shattered the silence. "Come in," she said, taking a careful step back. It was Martin, the board chairman. "I'll be brief," he said, closing the door behind him. "I've spoken to human resources." Claire's shoulders stiffened. If this relationship is real, company policy doesn't require either of you to resign. One of you would simply need to move into a different reporting structure. I blinked. What? Martin nodded. We were concerned about undisclosed conflicts of interest, not the relationship itself. The room fell quiet. Claire looked at him, almost confused. "I thought." She whispered. "You thought we'd force someone out?" Martin gave a tired smile. "No. What created the problem was believing you had something to hide." After he left, neither of us moved. One misunderstanding. That was all it had been. I let out a slow breath, almost laughing at how much fear we'd built around a future that hadn't even happened. Claire didn't laugh. Instead, she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a worn envelope. "I was going to destroy this years ago." She handed it to me. Inside was a recommendation letter. My name was typed across the top. The date stopped me cold. 4 years earlier. "I interviewed here while I was still in college," I said. "You probably don't remember." "I remember not getting the job." "You did get it." I looked up. Claire's eyes glistened. "I was the hiring manager. I recognized your potential immediately." "Then why wasn't I hired?" "Because my marriage was already falling apart, and I realized I was paying far too much attention to one applicant." She swallowed hard. "So I withdrew myself from the hiring process. I thought I'd never see you again." I stared at her, the pieces finally fitting together. She gave the smallest, saddest smile. "I've been trying to forget you for 4 years." And in that moment, I realized she had known my name long before I ever learned hers. I read the letter twice. Then a third time. Every sentence carried the same quiet truth: she had believed in me long before I had earned the chance to prove myself. You walked away because of me, I said. Claire shook her head. No. I walked away because I was married, and I refused to become someone I wouldn't respect. She didn't hide behind excuses. She didn't blame her past. She simply stood there, letting the silence say the rest. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. So what happens now? She looked toward the window overlooking the city. I'll ask the board to transfer your reporting line. Someone else can supervise your projects. And after that? Her smile was small, uncertain. After that, you're free to decide whether you ever want to see me again. The words landed harder than I expected. For the first time since all this began, the choice wasn't trapped behind office rules or whispered misunderstandings. It was mine. I crossed the room until I was standing in front of her. You've spent days deciding what's best for me. She looked up. Let me decide something. She waited. I don't want to lose my job. I know. I don't want you to lose yours. I know. I smiled, nervous enough to laugh at myself. But I also don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if we kept pretending we were strangers. Her eyes searched mine, as though making sure I understood exactly what I was saying. I do, I whispered before she could ask. A tear escaped despite her effort to stop it. She reached for my hand this time without hesitation. I can't promise life will be easy. I'm not asking for easy. She intertwined her fingers with mine. Outside, the office carried on as if nothing had changed. Inside, we made one simple promise. First, we would separate our professional lives completely. Then, when the paperwork was finished and no one answered to the other anymore, we would finally give us a real chance. A month later, I walked into the same office where this impossible story had begun. Only this time, Claire wasn't my boss. The company's restructuring had been completed. I now reported to another department, and for the first time since we'd met, there was nothing standing between us except our own choices. That evening, we left the building together without checking who was watching. The city was glowing beneath the setting sun. We walked in comfortable silence, the kind that no longer needed explanations. You know, Claire said with a quiet smile, the first day you joined the company, I told myself I'd never blur the line between work and my personal life. You kept that promise. I tried. You did. She looked at me, amused. You still defend me. I always will. She laughed, reached for my hand, and this time neither of us hesitated. There was no dramatic confession left to make. No secret to hide. No board meeting waiting to judge us. Just two people who had met at the wrong time, chosen patience over impulse, and finally found each other when the timing was right. Months later, we stood in a small garden surrounded by family and close friends, exchanging simple vows instead of complicated promises. As I slipped the ring onto her finger, she leaned close enough for only me to hear. I suppose I can finally call you my husband. I smiled. This time, you're telling the truth. Everyone laughed, but only we understood how far those words had traveled. Looking back, I realized love isn't about stealing the perfect moment. Sometimes it's about waiting until you can choose each other honestly. And when you do, it feels like coming home. Did you enjoy this story? ***. What kind of romantic stories would you like to hear next? Maybe another slow-burn workplace romance, an unexpected second-chance love story, or a heartfelt tale between two strangers whose lives change forever. Let me know in the comments.